Started. I see some more people coming in, and we'll be live on YouTube in just a moment, and we'll get started. Tonight, we'll be talking about the 80-20 rule and how it pertains to your health. See here. All right, looks like we're doing good over on YouTube. And let's head back over here. Welcome everyone who's coming in. I see some new faces, or some new names, I should say. And tonight, essentially, Sharon's saying she's calling in or watching from Fort Worth, Texas. Nice. So tonight we are, and Pamela's calling in from Vermont. Very nice. So tonight we're going to be talking about the 80-20 rule. Now, 80-20 rule is actually an economic rule, oddly enough. It was discovered, observed by an Italian by the name of Wilfredo Pareto. It's otherwise known as the Pareto principle. And basically, it's a very simple principle. It basically says that 20% of the things that you do, the decisions you make, are causing 80% of the results, which basically means that if you can get the 20% down, you don't have to worry about anything else, because you're going to be accomplishing the majority of what you want to accomplish just with that just with the select 20% of things. So some people call it the law of the vital few, meaning just get those few most important things down, and then you can then look at things and be able to make changes that are going to yield the most results. So we're going to go through it in reasonable, decent detail. I am going to be asking for a little bit more participation than I normally do, because there's something about applying the 80-20 rule is that it requires a little bit of practice. Of course, you can't use the 80-20 rule for everything. It's, you can't say that, I like to spend time with this person, the 20% of, sometimes you can say that, thinking about relationships. 20% of the people that you know are probably the most, you get derive the most satisfaction from, of all the people you know. 20% of those of the people you know probably cause you the most heartache of the people that you know. 20% of the clothes you have, you wear 80% of the time. All these things sort of repeat through things, but obviously crafting an entire life based on the 80-20 rule is not the way to go, obviously, because that's going to yield some fairly selfish motivations. But when it comes to optimizing your health, and something that we've been speaking about over the last 31 weeks, is that what are the actionable changes that you can make? What are the 20% of things that are going to make an 80% of the improvement? What are the 20% of facts that you need to know to be able to make decisions for yourself and for your family and for your loved ones? And we're going to go through all that tonight. And just the other people coming in addition to Pamela and Sharon, Alana, Grant, Lewis, Linda, Joseph, several people still filing in. Welcome, everyone. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. Okay. Share. Okay, and you should all see my screen. Let me blow it up a little bit. And as I said, I'm looking a little bit more for participation here on this particular webinar. So I've titled it Using the 80-20 Rule to Improve Your Health, Part 2. We spoke about this the first week, and I've had a lot of time to sort of think about this and really refine sort of how it can be used for your health. And it's one of those things that I've also been spending a fair amount of time sort of learning how to communicate ideas and to teach things better, because we all have sort of a core value in our life. And for me, for sure, it's learning. And there was someone years ago who led me through this thing that he called a core value discovery exercise, which basically asks you the question, what is the one thing in your life that if it wasn't there, you would feel as though life was really not worth living? And you can't say, it can't be relationship based. So you can't say your family, and you can't say your family, basically. Well, for me, and there's no right answer. Everyone has a different core value. For me, it's learning. If I'm not continually learning, I feel like I feel like there's something missing. And so in the context of essentially learning, there's a whole other thing related to teaching. And what I found that's been the most rewarding part of this is essentially that learning how to present things to you has been a great benefit to me. And so I thank everyone for that. Pamela, I answered health, but actually it's health, and you can't pick health. You can't pick family. I forgot. Those are the two things. So what is the next thing that you can't live without, essentially? And that obviously sometimes it takes a little bit of time to sort of figure out what that might be. If you know what yours is, definitely type it into the box. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what it is. Then we'll go into why we should use it. Sharon's listing purpose, having a purpose. Okay, and of course, then that would lead me to go to the next thing is what is that purpose? And you can start to continue to refine that. For Tricia, who just typed in music, perfect. I can totally see how you could have a core value being something like music, where music, if you don't have music around, that you can feel like, there's something huge missing in your life. And therefore you can use music to grow in so many different ways. So we'll go through what the 80-20 rule is, which we spoke about a little bit more, why we want to use it, how to apply the principle, and then we'll talk a little bit about additional considerations. Now, we spoke a little bit about what the 80-20 rule is, but to simplify it, is 20% of your inputs yield 80% of your outputs. And to me, and to you, it should be the most, it should give you a feeling of just being grateful that this rule exists, because it means we don't need to learn or to understand 100% of anything. We just need to be able to figure out what the 20% is that's going to yield 80% of the outputs. And that's why, as I always say, my goal is to teach you to become your own authority in health, which basically means for you to become your own authority, at least in terms of being able to make decisions for yourself and for your loved ones. You just need to focus on the 20% that's going to make the most impact. And so that is what this is. Now, I remember reading that in addition to the fact that he was Dr. Pareto, who came up with this principle, was an economist, he also was a gardener. And I believe the story goes that he actually was growing peas, and he found out that 20% of the pea pods yielded 80% of the peas in his garden. And in his work, he noticed that 20% of the landowners in Italy in the late 1800s owned 80% of the land in Italy. And this is just repeating over and over again. So why is it that we should use this? And I've sort of described this already, because if you only need to know 20%, it means that you can become your own authority. It means you just need to focus and learn the skill of how to apply this to be able to determine what the vital few are. What are the 20% that's going to make the most impact for your overall health? And for the rest of tonight's talk, we'll go through how to apply this principle through various examples. And then I would like for you to think about it in your own life and how this rule pertains to your own life in terms of how you spend your time. We'll talk about all the aspects of things, the activities that you do, which ones cause the most satisfaction in your life. It's going to be usually somewhere around 20%. Now, the numbers are not really that important. It just means, because it's not always 20%. It could be sometimes 5% of the things are yielding 90%, 95%. It doesn't have to total 100 either. Oftentimes in businesses, 20% or sometimes 10% of customers make up, 80 or 90% of the sales. So, and, for businesses, it's certainly very important, because if you can cater your business and not try to please everybody, but focus on those people that are the most important, obviously this translates into other things in life, then you can continue to improve and improve incrementally. So let's talk about how we can apply this principle through various different things. And we are going to talk about my 12 rules of health that essentially are the first 12 lectures and of this particular Wednesday Night Live. But first we'll talk about Dr. Robert Rundell's 4 pillars. And the 4 pillars we've gone over many times, but let's look at them through the lens of the 80-20 rule. Blow this up a little bit. So how can we think about mental state? Well, the mental state, your emotional stability, the things that impact your ability to feel as though you have a rested, emotionally stable constitution. What are those things? And are there small inputs that can yield a great output? We've spoken a little bit before about the nervous system and balancing the nervous system. And as you know, you have essentially you have two wings of the nervous system. You have a sympathetic, which is sort of your fight or flight. And then you have the parasympathetic, which is your rest and recharge. That's otherwise what it's known as. And in order for you to have a balanced nervous system, which is going to contribute to having a very even-keeled emotional state, at least contribute to that, you need to have these balanced. And what's interesting about that is that you don't need to have them obviously 50-50. And this is sort of a way that we can put forward 80-20 thinking. Let's do that. So is there something you can do to balance your nervous system that follows the 80-20 principle? Well, you really only need 20 to 40 minutes of downtime per day. This is inwardly directed relaxation. It could be prayer, meditation, controlled breathing, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And you can get good balance of your autonomic nervous system just by doing this 20 to 40 minutes of downtime per day. And that's such a small amount of time in the context of an entire day that all of us can sort of figure out how to incorporate 20 to 40 minutes of downtime. Now, the other key factor about this is I spoke about it being inwardly directed. So reading a novel or watching a movie is generally not going to be something that's going to be helpful in this regard. What you're going to be looking for here is real downtime where, again, it could be a yoga or it could be meditation. It could be, as I said, it could be prayer. Something that is sort of inwardly directed and you can feel changes your body. What's interesting is that they've discovered, and I just finished a book called Breath by James Reston, I think his name was, and it's fascinating, but there is essentially slow breathing that is going to improve what's called heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is an indicator, a measure of essentially your ability, your resilience, let's call it that way. Let's call it that, but it impacts obviously your mental state because it creates sort of more resilience, and that's going to help things. Remarkably, if you look at cultures around the world, whether it's yoga breathing or Tai Chi breathing, or even some prayers that are recited in various religions, it turns out that if they are chanted in a certain way, they always come out to somewhere between 5.5 and 6 breaths per minute. And so these are very slow in breaths, which could be, a 10 second, breath. Very slow breathing has been shown to improve heart rate variability more than anything else, which basically means that all of these things that you read about how everyone needs to meditate and incorporate meditation, that sort of thing, if that's not your type of style, you only need to learn this 5.5 to 6 breaths per minute heart rate variability improvement that you get. You get heart rate variability. There are apps that you can buy that will help guide you through these breaths so that you have a timer. I haven't seen those, but plan to look at them at some point in time. And you can get the benefits, at least the bodily benefits of meditation by just doing this for a very, very short period of time. We've spoken about Dr. Weil has a breathing technique, which is a yogic breathing. There are lots of different things you can do, but this has been duplicated around the world. So there must be something to it, and it has been studied, in fact, to show improvement. So this is such a small amount of time, and it really conforms to the idea of the 80-20 rule, being that you just need to get autonomic, to balance your nervous system. You just need to spend a short period of time during the day to do this. The next is what I call Epstein's false emergency state. False emergency state is that feeling when you drop a glass, or the feeling when 10 minutes before this, my computer crashed and I didn't know if I lost the presentation. That would be an example of something that is a false emergency state. Why is it a false emergency? Because it's not a true emergency. And Dr. Epstein used to say, when you're in a situation where you feel like things are stressed and you feel like your sympathetic nervous system is going haywire and your emotional stability is messed up and everything is falling apart around you, the question that has a potent impact if you practice it, and it only takes a second, conforming, of course, to that 80-20 rule, is to ask yourself, and continually ask yourself, especially if you're dealing with a great deal of stress, is it a true emergency? And really, the only emergencies we have are if we are going to be, if someone has a bullet to our head or something of that sort. Otherwise, it's not a true emergency. See, all these emergencies try to pull us into a sort of an unknown future where everything is going to go crazy. But at the moment, is it really a true emergency? And the answer is 99.9% of the time not. You have shelter, you have food, and you don't know what the future holds. So this is a very potent 80-20 like question to always ask yourself in the situation. As example, when my computer crashed 10 minutes before this presentation, I asked myself, especially now, because we were talking about this, is it a true emergency? And the answer, of course, is no. And it can short circuit if you get it. This is a practice. And of course, the practice is short. You're going to ask yourself this many times per day, but it only takes a quick second. And over time, you'll see that your reaction to stress can change. All right, so that's your mental state. Now, how about environmental influences? What are the 20% of things that make the most difference? Well, it's pretty obvious, I would think, for most of us. Air, water, temperature, and clean food. Now, there's lots of details to all of these things, but the fact is that we can all conceptualize what to do about the air. There are all kinds of air cleaning that you can do. You could take one step. What is the one thing? There's a great book that I've read multiple times. It's a fabulous book, and it's very much like the 80-20 rule. The book is called The One Thing, and throughout the book, he says to you, talks to you, writes to you, and basically urging you to ask yourself, what's the one thing I can do now to X? What's the one thing? Always focus on the one thing, and that's essentially 80-20 thinking. What's the one thing you can do to clean the air in your apartment? Could it be opening the windows? Could it be buying an air filter? What about the water? We spoke about, there are lots of ways of cleaning or assessing your water. We've spoken about that in one of the lectures. Temperature, are we dealing with temperature fluctuations? Are we at the optimal temperature? Do we keep the temperature proper? These are things that cause a great deal of stress. And clean food, of course, we've spoken about that at length. Nutrition, we'll get into a little bit more later, but obviously what food category impacts your health the most for positive? And of course, that's plants. Next is movement and mechanics, so exercise. And exercise is another fascinating thing because obviously you don't need to exercise all the time. Exercise is essentially a small amount of time that's yielding a huge benefit. And that's one way of looking at exercise, in fact, as this very small investment in time. And in fact, you'll see in a moment that the investment of time is actually a lot smaller than you actually might think that's required. And so it conforms to this 80-20 rule, but let's get into some details. So how does 80-20 help us here? Well, essentially you can break down, here, let me close some of these. Essentially, you can break down fitness into several different categories. One is, of course, resistance training. The next is cardiovascular performance. And then it could also be divided into long distance walking, so that's sort of slow endurance, slow type endurance, and then flexibility would be the other one. But let's focus on resistance training and cardiovascular performance. So we know that and one of the reasons why it's great to get a trainer is because they know that there's certain exercises that work better for strength than others. Weightlifters know that things like squats and deadlifts have more potential for increasing your overall strength than other exercises. But the point is that it's important to spend a little bit of time learning to try to identify what are the 20% of exercises that are going to yield the best benefit in terms of muscular development, muscular keeping your muscles, that sort of thing. Now, for cardiovascular performance, it's fascinating. Now, we know, of course, that excuse me, that in the 80s and 90s, people would go to the gym and they would basically be on the treadmill for an hour, or they would go to a long aerobics workout, like the Jane Fonda type workouts. And we know that is not as effective as we thought. In fact, you really shouldn't be out of breath for more than around 20 minutes at a time, because it's been shown that long distance training, where you are basically really going at it, and you're essentially one of the ways of assessing whether or not you're exercising at an excessive level is if you're out of breath. And if you're out of breath for more than 20 minutes at a time, that's probably too much. Now, there was a professor in Japan. His name was Professor Tabata, and he came up with a test. And what this test was 20-second intervals of high intensity exercise, followed by 10 seconds of rest. And then they repeated that 8 times for a total of only 4 minutes, okay? The first group of athletes trained at moderate intensity for 1 hour, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. So that's sort of the old-fashioned kind of exercise. The second group of athletes trained at high intensity for 4 minutes, what we just spoke about. So group one, the group that was training for an hour, 5 days a week, saw a 10% increase in VO2 max. VO2 max is how your body takes up oxygen. But their anaerobic system did not improve at all. Meanwhile, group two, who did 4 minutes only, increased their VO2 max by 15% and their anaerobic system by 28%. So here's a situation where athletes were training 1 hour, 5 days a week versus a second group that was training for 4 minutes, 4 days a week. And who won in terms of measurable impacts in exercise? The group that did 4-minute exercise. Now, I'm not suggesting anyone do this exercise. 20-second intervals, these 20-second intervals, I mean, you drop dead after the end of this 4 minutes, because you're going all out, literally all out on, say, a bike or sprinting for 20 seconds and then only 10 seconds rest, and then you repeat that for 4 minutes. Not everyone can do that, but everyone can do what is called high intensity interval training, which is basically just getting your heart rate or your conditioning up to a point where you're out of breath for a short period of time, and then you take a rest, and then you raise it up again, and then you go through in intervals that you can work on your own up to 20 minutes. Of course, work with your doctor, make sure that you're capable of doing this. But a lot of people say, well, I can't do high intensity interval training. And sometimes you can, but what's high intensity for one person, it depends on your level of conditioning. High intensity interval training for someone who hasn't been in the gym for years could just be going on an incline for 30 seconds, walking at a normal pace, a very slight incline. And then you might get a little bit out of breath, and then you can rest, and then do it again, and slowly build up your tolerance. Obviously, get your doctor's advice on this sort of exercise, but this is Tabata. Professor Tabata really showed 80-20 thinking, at its best, because we're able to hone in on optimizing what are the optimal things that you can do to improve your performance. So the whole concept of exercise, essentially the fact that it impacts your overall health, small part of the time. Even if you're walking an hour a few days a week, still a very, very small impact that is going to yield so much benefit in so many different ways, from blood sugar to longevity to so many different things. And if we can just program in, as we spoke about, a short period of time into your day to balance your autonomic nervous system, which we spoke about, that 20 to 40 minutes, and then another 20 to 40 minutes, and then the impact on your overall health is so incredibly dramatic. So those are the 4 pillars. Now, we've gone through in detail my 12 rules, but let's go through them again with an eye for the 80-20 rule. So rule number 1 is to use the 80-20 rule to make decisions for your health. So we don't have to go through that. Second is reducing exposure to harmful chemicals. Now, we've sort of spoken a little bit about that. Obviously, we are talking about air, water, and food, essentially. And you can work on that. And you can all say to yourself, what's the one thing I can do to improve the quality of my food? Well, it could be organic, or it could just be the fact that you'll take 10 seconds to wash your vegetables a little bit more than you did in the past. For water, it could be that you buy a filter or a reverse osmosis machine, or you change your water source, whatever it might be. Just choose one thing, and you can reduce the exposure to harmful chemicals. Rule number 3 is understanding nutrient density. And this is classic 80-20 rule, in the sense that we're trying to pick out foods which are, give you more bang for the buck, which basically means that we're trying to get as many micronutrients in your diet as we possibly can. And that is, again, 80-20 thinking, because most of us have been trained to think about macronutrients. We've been trained to talk about and think about protein, fat, and carbohydrates. But what if you paid more attention to that small thing, otherwise known as micronutrients? What would that do for you? And in fact, it would improve your health dramatically. And that's why it's rule number 3 in my rules, because when you focus on picking the foods with the most nutrient density, meaning the most nutrients per calorie, then you are optimizing your diet in such a way that is really, really dramatic. I've given, it was probably around the 3rd or 4th week where we did a full hour talking about nutrient density and how to understand nutrient density. But once you get a full understanding of it, then it makes it very easy for you to be able to choose those foods, choose the minority of things that people talk about, which is people don't talk that much, especially when it comes to weight loss. They don't talk as much as they should when it comes to micronutrient density to your food. Next is rule number 4, which is follow ancient plant preparation practices, meaning how are you preparing plants? Plants have all kinds of defense mechanisms to them. And if you can just get a clear understanding of the lessons that our ancestors learned about how to prepare these plants, then we have a very clear understanding of how to optimize our health in that regard. And basically, it's soaking, sprouting, fermenting, and cooking. And honestly, these are skills that are great to learn for yourself, but also as a lens. You're looking at these things through the lens of the 80-20 rule, in the sense that, okay, so we generally don't think much about plant preparation because we just cook it. And but our ancestors knew that certain foods had to be soaked, certain foods need to be sprouted, certain foods need to be fermented in order to be able to increase the bioavailability, the ability of your body to absorb those. Next is rule number 5. Just doing a little time check here. Rule number 5 is to eat for your microbiome. So again, it's technique for maximizing that in the most optimal way. 80-20 is to be able to maximize the fiber intake to the right type of fiber, and how to incorporate that in a simple and easy way, so you don't have to be thinking about doing complicated things, just understanding the techniques for maximizing that. And that was probably week 5 or 6 that we spoke about that. Next is regaining. Rule number 6 is regaining true hunger. And all of these interact in many ways, but essentially it is how to understand light, sleep, stress, blood sugar, and how inward focus, so societal cues, that sort of thing, need to be looked at to be able to regain true hunger. We don't even have a clear understanding, most of us, because of processed food and social cues to when to stop eating, all that sort of stuff. But if we just focus on these simple things, is there issues with light that are affecting our circadian rhythm? That can affect your ability to have true hunger, as opposed to what's called false hunger, that was described by a doctor by the name of Joel Fuhrman. And this, when you have a true hunger, you do not have shakiness, you do not have weakness. It is just a feeling like you need to eat. But if you have issues with light that's interfering with your circadian rhythm, or sleep, which of course is also related, stress, blood sugar fluctuations, and what we've learned in terms of how to eat, all these things. But the point is that we can focus on these factors, which are relatively few in number, understand what they are, and then be able to make changes to assess whether or not they're impacting our ability to appreciate true hunger. Next is rule number 7 of what we'll call Carp's 12 rules, which is metabolic flexibility. And metabolic flexibility is the ability of your body to switch from burning sugar to burning fat. It's like metabolic fitness in the sense that your body can switch between both. For people who are constantly eating all the time and who have blood sugar spikes and fluctuations and high insulin levels from eating too much meat and sugar, that can get rid of your metabolic flexibility, which has a whole host of issues. And we spoke about that in detail. But what's the 80-20 here? The 80-20 thing is biological fasting, which is that 5-day fasting mimicking diet that we spoke about at length. When you're able to just do 5 days of reduced calorie eating in a very specific fashion, you're able to restore your metabolic flexibility, and you're able to achieve metabolic flexibility with this technique. If there's anything that characterizes the 80-20 rule better than this, I can't think of it. It's basically, 5 days per month, but honestly, you only need to do it for 3 months, and then once a quarter, basically. So it's classic 80-20. It allows you to achieve this metabolic flexibility, which is associated with increased improvement in parameters in health, including cholesterol and blood sugar, all kinds of things. So it is classic 80-20. And if you haven't heard my talk on metabolic flexibility, again, it's looks like we're missing a 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, we're missing a 6. Okay, well, I wonder what happened. Oh, no, here's 6. It somehow got pulled out. Let's pull that back in. Okay, so next is ordering your own labs. Now, honestly, most of us don't feel comfortable ordering our own labs. Around week 8 of Wednesday Night Live, we went over what those tests are. I discussed 7 basic tests, but honestly, you could even narrow it down even more to things like cholesterol, insulin level, hemoglobin A1C, and probably a basic count. But you can go and watch that. But the point here is that if we're going to be making changes for our health, we need to take a certain amount of control over our own health. And most people don't feel comfortable walking into a lab and ordering your own test. I would tell you, however, it's an incredibly empowering thing, because I have encouraged people to do this. And when they sort of muster up the strength, some people it's not an issue, but others, they are sort of like, well, it's not the kind of thing that I would do. But if you can do that, or you can work with your doctor, of course, to order these tests. But the point is that you need to step up and do it yourself. So it is about making this first step forward to becoming your own authority in health by learning to assess your health on your own through lab tests. I think that's an incredibly important thing. And you don't need to measure a ton of different things. Obviously, if you want to work with me on this, that's fabulous. Definitely reach out to me. Go and watch week 7 or 8, however that comes out on the YouTube channel of Wednesday Night Live to sort of understand this in more detail. But it's another sort of 80-20 thinking where, well, can we just narrow down to a few blood tests that we can get on our own to be able to assess things on our own. Next is the 4 rule that I call it. That's rule number 9. And that basically says that you just need to focus on having ready to go 4 meals. You need to satisfy 4 flavors, one being umami, which we spoke about at length and the reasons for that. 4 vegetables and how to select 4 fruits. We spoke about how when it comes to vegetables, we want to get different families, but we really just need to focus on understanding 4 families, understanding the low sugar fruits, and having these ready to go 4 meals. Don't worry about having, again, it's 80-20 thinking. Don't worry about being able to make 50 different recipes. You can craft very easily, if you spend just a little bit of time, 4 meals that are go-tos for you. Now, I use my Instant Pot, which is quick and easy. I throw stuff in there, and I can make various different types of vegetable stews. If you add a little bit of protein, you can do that as well, and it always comes out well. So you can have probably 2 or 3 in an Instant Pot, and then a couple others. But if you can just focus on 4 meals and get them down, you are going to be improving your health in a dramatic way, because you'll be able to, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? Well, you'll have at least 4 choices, and they'll be easy, quick, and ready to go. So classic 80-20 thinking. Next, rule number 10 is how to change your home. You should change your home to optimize your health. Again, we've spoken about this. It's essentially food, water, air, and nervous system balancing, which we spoke about in terms of breathing, and consciously thinking about food, water, and air. And part of this is to try to find a small corner of your home that becomes almost like a space, like a sacred space in a sense, where you can do your breathing, or you can do your reading, or Trisha, you can, corner of your room where you're playing the piano or whatever instrument, or listening to music, but having a place where your body can just rest, and there's signals for it to rest, because this is your place in the home. We spoke about that at length somewhere around week 10 or so. Week 11 was make a contribution to others, and we spoke about how to influence other people. But most importantly, we spoke about how when we start making important changes in our health, people start to approach us, and sometimes we become so excited about the changes that we've made that we become evangelists. And the advice that was given to me was to just serve as an example, keep your mood up, and don't make it too important. Because if you do, you tend to alienate people. Obviously, you can serve as an example, but in order to make a contribution, we went through this in detail, of course, but the biggest lesson is to keep your mood up when you're talking about health and the great impact that it's made. but don't make it too important and don't try to convince them. Just serve as an example. And in that way, you don't do any harm to other people. You become harmless in a sense, and you are there for them if they have questions. The final is restoring youthful immune function. The reason this is rule number 12 is because we can get everything right, but as we get older, our immune, regardless of how good we're eating, our immune function starts to decrease. And this is one of those rules that the science is always going to be changing. But we do know that we spoke about incorporating what's called Synalytic Strategies. These are cells that release chemicals that damage the cells around them. I don't want to get into details about that. Go to my lecture on that. But mushrooms like reishi, teas like pu'er, and obviously traditional immune boosting supplements like small doses of zinc and vitamin C and having your vitamin D level checked. And that's rule number 12. So this is sort of 80-20 thinking for all of these different things. Now, there are a few additional considerations that I would like to raise. And these are basically related to just thinking about how we might want to incorporate this thing that we're talking about. We have another 15 minutes to get through that. I want to go through these. We're getting a little theoretical here, and I'd like you all to think about these. And I think we're going to talk about McClelland's motivation theory first. And I want you to think about how this pertains to you in terms of how you want to make a change in your overall health and what the motivation is. Now, McClelland's human motivation theory basically says that we are motivated to make change based on 3 different factors: achievement, affiliation, and power. Or I should say, or power. Now, you might have a combination of these, but I think all of us should think about what is our motivation for learning or making changes. Now, achievement, he basically says, has a strong need to set and accomplish challenging goals, takes calculated risks to accomplish their goals, likes to receive regular feedback on their progress and achievements, often likes to work alone. Whereas some people are motivated by affiliation. They want to belong to a group. They want to be liked, will often go along with whatever the rest of the group wants, favors collaboration over competition, doesn't like high risk or uncertainty. And then the power people who want to control and influence others. They like to win arguments. They enjoy competitions and winning, and they enjoy status and recognition. Now, you might have a combination of these working in your mind. One is no better than the other. These are just ways of thinking about motivation. Now, give me an idea of your motivation to make change. Is it related to achievement, affiliation, or power? Or is it a combination of all 3? Let me know what your thoughts are. And type them into the chat box. It's important because when you have an idea of which one you are most motivated by, it gives you a little bit of a better idea about how to measure and to reinforce your success. If you are achievement oriented and you're setting certain goals like losing a certain weight or going by numbers, say your lab tests, or maybe it is essentially you're part of you're part of a club or something like that, and you are joining it to improve your health, or who knows what it is. Or are you associated with power? You want to show people that you are capable of controlling yourself and improving and influencing others, and that you have learned quite a bit, and that you are respected by people who see that you have made an enormous improvement in your overall health. Which of these motivates you the most? Sharon is saying a combination of achievement and affiliation. Okay, nice. Next, I'd like to, before we say goodbye for tonight, talk about the DILT's 5 levels of learning. And the key here is that you're all learning how to make changes in your overall health. That's really what at least that's my hope. My hope is, and what I'm going to be focusing on for the next 30 weeks or so, is to really hone in on what is it that I can say that is going to lead to actionable changes in your life, to improve your life, improve your health. What are those things? And DILT's levels of learning basically tells us that there are all these different levels, and they all need to be consistent for you to make really significant changes in your overall health. It starts at the bottom, which is your environment. Let's just say you make a change in your environment. That sometimes leads you to learn different things, which leads to you seeing that there's different sorts of behaviors that may be required, which leads you to understand that you might have to have certain capabilities, which leads you to maybe the belief that these capabilities are associated with certain beliefs and values for them to be consistent, which leads you to this concept of your identity. What is your identity and your mission? If you can get these all aligned, then you are going to be learning and incorporating things in and making strides that you never have achieved before. Now, these are higher up, which basically means that a lot of us have issues with our identity in terms of thinking about it like self-image. A lot of us don't think, if I were to like externalize your self-image in terms of, say, your body, we might see something that is completely inconsistent with your behavior or with the goal that you want to achieve, which basically means that if your identity is not, your self-image and your identity is not set, it's not incorporated, then you're going to have issues with learning and making significant changes. So this is just one thing to think about, because as we work on the higher level things, the ones below it tend to fall into place. If your identity is such that you are capable of making, well, that would be capabilities, but that your self-image is one of ongoing improvement, confidence in the ability to make changes in your life and your, let's say, your physical body and your mental state. If that is consistent, that will lead you to have beliefs and values consistent with that, which will make you realize that to have that identity, you need to have certain capabilities, certain ways of acting or incorporating changes into your overall health, which is going to lead to different behaviors. And it might lead to you having to make certain changes in your environment. So these things work at very different levels, but if you get the mission in order, then you can work on all of these to sort of create this bond, this, multi-stranded rope that is going to be much stronger. And it's a way of looking at, well, is my environment right for what I want to do, my mission? Is my behavior consistent with my mission and my identity? Have I developed the capabilities to be able to realize my mission? What about the beliefs and values? As I mentioned before, a lot of times when I say, you can go in and order your own blood test, a lot of people will be like, well, immediately they sometimes say something like, well, they don't say it in as many words, but they infer, well, I'm just not the type of person that would do such a thing. And this is just an exercise in really looking at that in a little bit of a deeper fashion. And I'd like to end with, is actually Dr. Napoleon Hill had these 5 questions you should ask yourself that he related, I believe, to building a business. But I really felt that it was something good to go through as a way of ending tonight's lecture. These are 6 questions that I would like all of you to really think about deeply for your own health journeys, I guess you could say. First is, when circumstances require me to use my time in a way I did not plan it, do I, in that time, know my mind and use it beneficially? So if we really have this purpose, in place and mission of really improving our health, then we do know, of course, that of course we're going to use the 80-20 rule, but we have to learn certain facts and certain techniques, certain capabilities to be able to determine what that 20% is. And if I have free time, how am I using my free time? Am I using it in congruence with the mission that I have, or am I, wasting it? And that wasted time, how could that be put to benefit to realize my mission? Next is, have I set up my schedule so I can get my rest? So important. Now, we've spoken about nervous system balancing, but ultimately, for you to make significant changes, you are going to have adequate rest. Next is, when I find a way to express myself, do I do it even if others may disapprove? And this goes back to Diltz's levels, because a lot of times we are in an environment that might be difficult for us to express ourselves, or we are used to certain behaviors, or we have certain beliefs and values that basically say that I am not going to express myself even if others may disapprove. This is something that we need to ask ourselves, because if we truly want to make significant changes in our life, we have to, and of course, as I always say, become your own authority. We have to be able to make health decisions that others may disapprove. I've spoken many times about how when people lose weight, they often get a lot of resentment and negativity from people around them. And you really have to learn to be able to express yourself, even if others may disapprove. Next is, have I freed myself of regional or cultural customs that hamper how I eat or exercise? Maybe we're in a family that no one ever exercised, or we're in a, community that, you might be looked at if you exercise a certain way. These sorts of things we need to work on, because they can be very, very restricting for your overall health. And again, going back to these DILTS levels, if your mission is such, if you have a solid mission and you really have that ingrained, then you won't have any of these issues. I shouldn't say that. If you have the mission, it just makes it easier for you to be able to align all of these things. One of which is to realize that, if you're in a family that no one ever exercises, it's difficult for you to go exercise. And you have to really at least acknowledge that and learn to deal with that in a certain way. Next is, am I willing to question the way others do things and never make an absolute guide out of that's the way it's done? These are to me, they're very, very similar, but they seem very, very different. You're going to get, we live in a world essentially that is filled with edutainment or intellectual, people just talking about all kinds of different facts and things like that. And sometimes focusing in on the 20%, as we spoke about, is going to alienate people, because they're going to think you're ignoring, or you're doing something that's not the way it's done. Or, as an example, we spoke about exercise and how you can really optimize exercise. Well, some people are going to say, well, that's just not the way it's done. Or maybe, you're dealing with people who grew up a certain way. We need to question the way others do things. And the 80-20 rule is a way of questioning things. It's a way of questioning, does it really need to be this way? I mean, can I actually focus in on optimizing this in a way that's going to help and find the 20% that's going to make things, make the improvements? And then the final question to ask yourself is, have I clarified my motivation for optimizing my health? And that relates back to having a little bit more insight into McClelland's motivation theory. So have we clarified what our motivation is. And is it aligned with our mission? You know, if our mission is that I want to be an inspiration to my children as a way of taking care of my overall health, to serve as an example, let's say that is your mission. But if it's inconsistent with, if your overall motivation for general achievement is different than that, then there could be an issue. So have you clarified your motivation? And once you've clarified your motivation, that can lead you to developing that mission statement, so to speak, which is going to help you with all those other things. So I wanted to end with these questions because I think, look, we all deal with this in various ways. And there are people out there who have no problem with expressing themselves and do it if others disapprove. But most of us have trouble doing that. Most of us have trouble freeing ourselves of regional and cultural customs. It's just the way it is. It's just good to know that there are certain things that you do need to consciously think about. And I really find these questions, especially when I go through them with customers, clients, patients, it really allows me to see how aligned they are in their overall mission to improve their health. So that is tonight's class, a little bit different from what we've spoken about, but I would love it if you would all think about the 80-20 rule a little bit more in your life and your business and your overall, your health when it comes to improving your health. So thank you everyone for your attention. And next week, we're going to be talking about autoimmune disease. And we're going to talk about lifestyle diet to reverse autoimmune disease. There's actually a great deal of scientific literature that is, for whatever reason, not acknowledged, even though it's been published. And I'd like to, most of us know people who have one of the 150 or so autoimmune diseases like psoriasis or lupus or Hashimoto's thyroiditis or Crohn's disease or ankylosing spondylitis, all these types of conditions. Maybe you have them yourself. And next week, we're going to go fully into what is the best diet for that? What are the lifestyle suggestions? Because it is something that can be helped dramatically. It's one of the most amazing things I see in my medical practice is reversal of some of these conditions. And next week, we'll be talking about that. After that, the week after that, we'll talk about vitamins and how to choose vitamins for yourself. So thank you all for your attention for tonight's episode 31 of Wednesday Night Live. I enjoy your input and appreciate everything you do to comment afterwards and communicate with me. Many of you on here, I'm in continual connection with, so I do appreciate that, and wish everyone a good night and stay well. I wish you all health and have a great night.